thank you for coming in. The Columbian Editorial Board is pleased to welcome Congresswoman Jaime Herrera Beutler. I'm Greg Jane, the editorial page editor. I believe you know the editorial board members. And I know you're on a tight schedule, so I apologize in advance if
rapid fire.
Keep things moving.
Okay.
Because we have a lot to get to. And as you know, we're videotaping this. We'll post it unedited on our website. So with that, what brings you in, and thank you for reaching out to us.
Well, I wanted to, I'm sure there's a few minor things that are happening in DC that I'm sure people are going to hear about.
We'll get to that in
but
a while.
not foreseeing all of that, I just wanted the chance. I appreciated your willingness and openness, the conversation we had in February, and I really just wanted the chance to touch base on some of the things I've been working on and allow you the opportunity to ask questions. So It was really the genesis. Couple of highlights, I think we talked about a lot at that one. We also talked about healthcare, and I wanted to update, we've seen some real progress on the maternal mortality front. The grants are getting to the states from that landmark piece of legislation. I'm really excited about it. We got about, you all reported on it, 375,000 here, but we're also going to see it in other states so that every single maternal death is investigated. And then in turn, that information is going to be disseminated federally. And we can finally start putting a dent in that number of women who die in the United States in 21st century America. It could be upwards of 1,000 women a year, and 60% of those are preventable. So we're hopefully going to bring that number back down so we're not the highest in the developed world.
But are most of those children of color?
No, although you're more likely than a woman of color, as a woman of color, not as much Hispanic, but African American. In fact, significantly per 100,000 deaths, it's significantly higher than it is among white or Hispanic women.
Is the same true for Native Americans?
The numbers are a little different, and there's another piece there. Actually, I've been supporting with regard to just getting data on Native American women, and whether it's with childbirth or not, and their passing. We don't even keep those records very well, so. You know what? It's going to be different based on where you're at. Some of it has to do with being rural. Some of it has to do with an increasing use of cesarean sections. Some of it has to do with substance use. Some of it has to do with education of the mother with regard to her own health care. Some of it has to do with obesity. Some of it, so I think we're going to get telling information from different regions of the country. There's not a magic bullet, but that's exactly why every state needs to have a maternal mortality review committee so that we can then respond appropriately per the region. ACE Kids is now finally the law of the land, which allows kids who are on Medicaid, which is welfare, to cross state lines to access the care that they need. It's shocking that one took an act of Congress. Very excited about that. I think I'm transitioning, and we're still going to continue to work on healthcare, prescription drugs, and other pieces. But one of the things that people continue to talk to me about, especially in the family arena, is childcare. In what I'm learning, we're what they call a childcare desert. So if you're on the low income scale, generally we have some subsidies that we try and help with, right? But there aren't enough providers. There aren't enough actual buildings, and then there aren't enough qualified childcare providers. If you're on the upper end, generally you can pay for it, but we're still having a choke point issue. And in the middle, you don't get a subsidy, but you still have to pay for it. So I have a couple pieces of legislation I'm working on aimed at that. One of them has to do with getting grants to the states of about $100 million to address the shortage of facilities and the shortage of trained, qualified professionals.
Oh, why not seek universal child care?
How do you mean? Like in what? Like,
I mean,
like a government, federally run?
Or state run. Like we do for elementary schools.
Like elementary education?
Yeah.
Well, no one's asked me that. I, as a mother, could tell you I might have some.
In the 1970s, Congress actually passed that, and Nixon vetoed it.
I was not here.
No.
But I can look at that. Nobody's asked me for that. What they've asked me for is help. Nobody necessarily has said, we want you guys to set up this program. No, we have talked about an increased funding for early education. I think that's where there's a much broader consensus of, if you have limited dollars, put them into early education universally, right? And making sure everybody has access, and we have done that. We're trying to expand that. But on the straight childcare front, we're talking early pre-K, and yes, we're getting more slots for ECAP and Head Start, and that's as you get into the higher pre-K. So we're kind of bridging the gap, so to speak.
And should that be more of a federal initiative, or should that be up to the individual states?
Well, the grants would go to the states,
right?
And I think our role is to help with it and to identify. Look, this is they literally call them deserts because the state isn't doing anything. This is probably one of the number one issues people with families, young families, come to me about, and it spans the income spectrum. It is remarkable to me. It's one of the top issues that I get asked about, and it's because you want your kid to be in a quality place, that they're looked after, cared for, and it would be awesome if they also got challenged educationally and academically. But at the very least, when two parents or the partners have to work, you don't have a choice, and kids aren't, if they're not old enough for school, what are you going to do? And so this is a response to that, and it is bipartisan. And I think it's the first of its kind like this in Congress. The second piece would allow those who, don't qualify for an exemption, you're making better money, but it would increase the amount you can put away in your dependent care accounts, tax-free. And that one, it's actually a newer member. She's a single mom from California, came to me and said, I need a partner on this on the other side of the aisle. Will you do this one with me? And so I'm working on kind of building a portfolio of things that can hopefully attack this problem. And moving quickly on, the other piece that we probably will talk about, I don't know, but I know it's another top of mind issue, is the homelessness. So it's homelessness and housing. So there's two pieces there. We see it with 4,000 people a month who are moving to Portland, and then that pushes up into Clark County and pushes up into Cowlitz County, the shortage of entry-level homes for families. Again, this kind of comes around people who aren't making a ton, but they can maybe get into a reasonably priced home or rent. And we're just seeing that disappear. I introduced a bill this last week with Tenny Heck. I think it's fun. And there's a Senate companion that would increase, so as the federal funds are let, that it would encourage local jurisdictions, governments, to eliminate discriminatory practices around multi-housing. It would encourage them to, rather than, oftentimes there's duplicative paperwork processes when you're trying to move forward and build. It would encourage them to eliminate that. There's a couple other pieces in there. It's things that I didn't understand until I got into it. It would eliminate excessive lot size restrictions. So just say, hey, you know what? And Camas was a great example of this. They did this.
Say, what are excessive lot size restrictions?
I don't know that we see that as much here in our area. It's something that advocates from around the country have talked to me about. So certain jurisdictions apparently. I think some of it has to do with some communities that are more affluent. This is how we're going to build it. This is what it's going to look like. And if you can't afford into this, and go find a smaller community, which is probably typically further out from a work base that you're going to have to drive in for. This is one of the things I loved about Camas a number of years ago, when they built kind of it's an apartment complex right on Prune Hill, right in the middle of what is one of our more affluent areas, but it's kind of the opposite of being discriminatory against a multifamily housing unit, but people can afford to rent there, and then those kids have access to these schools. So the goal is to say, look, you're asking for these federal funds for community development. We want to know what you're doing to make sure that your communities aren't discriminatory.
So when you say excessive lot size restrictions, it's really advocating for the ability to put smaller lots.
Or to be flexible.
As opposed to restricting excessive lot sizes, which is kind of the opposite of it.
I don't know if I follow that one. Excessive lot sizes, I think what it's aimed at is saying you can't consider the size. If you're requiring everything to be a McMansion and a giant lot size, what you're then doing in terms of crowding out working families.
So it sounds like some places require larger lots. They don't allow which is kind of the opposite of for the most part, Washington.
They just
We
want
have
more
different,
flexible.
like I said,
Right.
the goal is to drive flexibility, and some of these areas are pulling down hundreds of millions of dollars in federal development grants,
Right.
yet they're making people live outside a city 2 hours
Sure.
to drive in and work there, and then they're like, we want transit money. That's great. We want to help you with the transit money, but how about we let people work and live closer to
That sounds
where they're
familiar.
working, right?
That sounds like a familiar discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Interesting.
that piece. Now when I talk about housing and affordability, there's more. That I'm looking at that in that space, and then on the homelessness space, generally, I shouldn't use a generalization because there's always different circumstances. But when you're talking about people who are experiencing homelessness as a result of mental or behavioral health or addiction, and that was the conversation I just came from. In the last probably 5 years, I've supported about $6 billion in funds aimed at, oh my goodness, that whole gamut from recovery, treatment, substance use, first responders, beds, space, capital investments. I mean, the whole pipeline, because I think we're just behind on the whole thing. The whole thing. Today I was asking them, is any of that money showing up? Is any of the money helping? It was a mixed bag. Some people said yes, some people said no. So that tells me we have more work to do. But I also think some of this issue is going to be, yes, the feds need to make sure that there's money there and support there. And we're breaking down, one of the things somebody said was, when you guys silo or streamline money, your intention is good. This is money for safe and drug, or I shouldn't use safe and drug free because that's a collaborative effort, but here's money for first responders with training for naloxone use. Well, the reality is that's not going to happen in a silo. So can the money be more flexible if they're working in collaborative effort with, they're going to be the ones that stop the acute OD, but then where can they send someone, and can that money help bridge the gap to the service provider, and can you make that money more flexible?
So is that typically provided to the state or
It's-
to a specific
All of the above.
jurisdiction?
That giant pot of money goes to a little bit of everything. But how do we make it more flexible? Because as they're developing these collaboratives, which I think is really the only way that we're going to begin to tackle this in these communities, all of our communities, because I think it's about the health of the community, ultimately. People go down these roads because they're isolated emotionally. I mean, it really speaks to the human nature of all of us. So I want those community groups who are a little bit of everything to have the ability to use that money as they see fit. So I think that's another piece. And then finally, it's Greg and I's favorite topic always, the economy. It continues to grow robustly. I was excited to see, the poverty rate or the poverty level has decreased to the lowest number in almost 20 years. Real wages and disposable income is up 3.4%. That's over last year. We're seeing an increase in tax revenue, finally. This is the question I expect.
The deficit is going to be $1 trillion this year.
Yeah, and
despite
part of
a
it,
good economy.
you're right. And
So if we gave your family, said, here's $1 million, that do you think you can make it look like you were prosperous while spending money that you don't really have? That's what the federal government is doing.
well, so let me finish this thought, and then we can. That's what I knew. I was like, we got to talk about this.
Yeah.
Greg and I have to talk about this. So what we're seeing, 2.2% is an increase of overall revenue coming in, right? Remember how I've talked about before, because you're like, when are we going to see it? When are we going to see this replacement of the money from the tax cuts that you gave folks? When are we going to see that money coming back in? And I always respond with, we're talking about a 10-year number. That tax loss is a 10-year number, and the rebuilding is going to be. So we're starting to see it on the income level. We're also seeing it in terms of payroll taxes. I think it's 4.7% up in the first 7 months of this year. That means we have more people paying taxes. So as that trajectory builds, that's what I'm watching. And my commitment has been, if we see that whole thing arrest, right? If it stops working, I'm not wed to any policy.
And what is the deficit this year?
Let's see, too much, which is why I voted against our 2-year budget deal. That was very bipartisan. Republicans and Democrats, the president supported it. Because even if you have all
I
this money
think-
coming in, if
I-
you're overspending, which is what a deficit is, you're going to be in deficit.
I think latest projection I saw, I believe, was 954 billion.
Almost a
was
trillion.
for this year, so about a trillion.
Yep.
Do you think that's responsible on the part of Congress?
I don't. I think the difference is, and again, that's part of why I said I can't vote for this budget deal that adds to that by overspending. But I also believe that if you allow people to keep more of their money, you're going to see economic growth and expansion, and ultimately we need more taxpayers. You know, under the no growth that we saw in the previous 8 years, I think 1.8%.
Actually, we saw quite a bit of growth.
I think our high water mark was 2.6%.
Well, but I think the Obama administration inherited a horrible recession.
That's fine.
And
I
by
mean,
the
that's
time they
I'm
left,
not
they
saying
were
that
out of it.
they got a great economy, but our high point under that administration was 2.6% GDP growth when they went out of office after his whole 8 years, after all the spending and the stimulus, because they spent it too. They just didn't give it as tax cuts. It was the government spending it. So it's not that it wasn't spent. Our growth GDP wise was 1.8%. We've now cruised at 3% or over 3% since we passed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act.
Because we're borrowing $1 trillion a year.
Because we're letting people, individuals, spend more of what they earn. And what we see is they're putting it into the economy.
Well, because the government is spending what it doesn't have.
Well, I don't know. There's a
$1
difference
trillion
between
a
borrowing
year.
money and spending it and saying you get to keep what is yours. I don't get to lay claim to it forever. I mean, this is a fundamental difference on how we see taxes, right? Under the last administration, they were. It's not that the money wasn't going out. It was a difference in philosophy. I guarantee President Obama didn't spend the money thinking, I just want to add to the debt. He spent the money thinking, I'm going to get the economy moving, get people working again, right? Get people off of welfare, get people off of, I talked about the poverty level. Under his administration, because of whether he inherited it or not, I will give it to you, right? People were up at this high level. I think it was the highest level ever for things in terms of poverty measures. And yet the economy wasn't moving, it wasn't working. So our approach was, let's stimulate it by letting people keep more of it, invest more of it, spend more of it. And we have now seen sustained economic growth since we passed it. So it's a difference in approach to how you move the economy forward. What I believe, though, in this last 10 years now, 8 of which under the last administration, those folks who typically are underrepresented, underserved, women, minorities, every single one of them, and if you look at the markers, people with disabilities are at record or near record lows, 50-year lows for unemployment. That didn't happen under the last administration, and that's a result of us moving the economy forward. In fact, Wall Street Journal had an article about job hopping. I didn't know this was a term, but those folks who are traditionally marginalized now have the ability to say to an employer, either give me more, add to my benefits, or I have this other opportunity, I'm going to leave. And we're seeing it happen, which is why real wages are up 3.4%. Real disposable income among middle and lower class folks is up this year. So I'm not saying it's the only way to grow the economy. I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm not saying that it's the Republicans have a corner on how to move things forward, but what we were doing wasn't working, and I had double-digit unemployment in every single one of my counties. And today in this county we're at 5.5%, and I want to see more of that. Part of it now, we also need to figure out how to not overspend again, which is why you're seeing moderate Democrats and you're seeing certain Republicans say, okay, time out. You can't just go willy-nilly. Just because we have tax revenue doesn't mean you can just spend it.
Okay, but just
Yep.
for the record, you
For the
did
record.
vote in favor of the $1.3 trillion omnibus spending bill in early 2018.
To fund the government?
Yes.
That's so the annual appropriations bill.
Yes, and this was
Yes.
after voting in favor of vast tax cuts.
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted
Vast
to,
tax cuts to the
Good.
American people, which has allowed the average family here, for the record, in Southwest Washington to keep upwards of $2,500 extra a year in their
and
pocket.
what's the debt now?
So today, the debt is the deficit, which is so depending on who you talk to, and if you add Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, which are the trust funds, into the additional spending, we're looking at a $20 trillion deficit and debt.
Debt, yeah, the deficit's about.
Well, and then you add to it, there's the debt service, which is really going to be the problem. Yeah, look, I've never embraced the government spending model. I do believe that allowing people to keep more of their money, though, isn't the same as me saying, I'm going to keep your money and I'm going to spend it on this stimulus. It's just a difference in philosophy.
Okay, but you did vote for the spending bill. Just want to clarify.
I do believe that we have to pay our federal employees. I do believe that I want the Department of Transportation, Education, Homeland Security to continue to function. People do, part of that is coming off of some big shutdowns and saying, well, the only way to address this is to shut the government down. I don't believe in that either. I think we need to pay people. All right.
How likely is it that Congress is going to work to try to reduce the deficit in a bipartisan way?
So there's deficit and then there's bipartisan. Right now, so I just joined a group called the Problem Solvers. It's a 1-for-1. Like, I got asked to join because for every Republican, you have to have a Democrat. Or for every Democrat, you have a Republican. And it has been one of the few really... So I work bipartisanly, but in terms of like a more corporate bipartisan effort, it's one of the few bright spots I've seen. It's a pretty big list. It's about, from the meetings I've been to, it's been 20 and 20. So it's a big group of people saying deficit issues, tax issues, transportation issues, kind of issues that are neither Republican or Democrat, and how do we move solutions forward? So I think that is, I think there's real hope there, and that is growing. We're in the middle of what I would say is the craziest political cycle I've ever seen, and I don't know.
A lot of people would say that.
So in terms of, so are we going to get those big picture things done with the help of the leadership from both sides? But there are a number of us working to that end. There are still good people left fighting. They're not all horrible. Some are.
Can I share a personal problem with you?
Yes.
I won't take very long on this, but
go for it.
Sounds
That's
like
on my
you're
list.
talking to your therapist.
it's about local journalism in communities across the United States.
Okay.
Here's an article I'm going to give you about a newspaper in
Like a family-owned
Pennsylvania.
local paper versus a big conglomerate.
Well, this it more has to do with the state of the industry, the news industry. In this day and age, and there's an act called the Digital Millennium Copyright Act of 1998, which I'm hearing a lot more of people in my circle talk about how the playing field is really not level, because we're not able to monetize our online content to the degree that we would like to.
Yeah.
But this describes kind of the situation with the press in the United States, and it's not so great because of the migration from analog to digital, and a lot of us are struggling, and we're looking for solutions on how to keep doing local journalism because it's shrunk by 50%.
Off the top of your head, what would be a couple of solutions?
Addressing that particular law, and I believe Ron Wyden introduced that.
The first time?
Yeah, I think the first time around, he I'm not sure about this. I'm just starting to study that because this article hit my desk yesterday morning.
I haven't.
But I think maybe it was a good idea at the time, but I think it might need some refinement now that there's a kind of a crisis in journalism.
Yeah.
And
I'll definitely take a
and
look.
a lot of journalism comes to people in their communities through newspapers, even if they're reading it on the internet or television stations and radio stations have had huge cutbacks in their news coverage. So
I always come here when I'm trying to get a detail, because you can get a little glance over. Maybe if it's a big issue, you can get a glance over on a different TV or one of a different paper. But if you really want to know what's happening, and I'm usually thinking, okay, I wonder if it was this individual or this group that was involved. And if you want those details, you have to come
Yeah,
to your local paper.
yeah, touche. Anyway, for what it's worth,
Okay.
I hope
Thank
there's,
you.
Obviously, an issue near and dear to our
Yes.
hearts.
Mm-hmm.
If we
Good,
could,
thank you.
can we talk about that crazy
Oh.
political cycle?
Yes.
It
will
is- so
give you what I
just,
know.
first of all, I just want to confirm, you said a couple of weeks ago
Mhm.
that it remained unproven that the president engaged in quid pro quo. Have you seen anything to change your opinion on that?
No. And I think this is where it's gonna, for me, this is what the crux is gonna be. Pooh. So I think there's some pretty serious questions that need to be answered. I think everybody wants to know, did the president engage in basically coercion to get Ukraine to engage in the 2020 election, obviously on his behalf, under the threat of withholding aid to Ukraine? That, to me, is the question, and it needs to be proven. I definitely think there are questions raised about it, and I think we need to get to the bottom of them. Unfortunately, just in the last week, as I've seen this whole thing unfold every day, I feel like we're getting further from honestly answering that question, because it's becoming such a partisan. I mean, I've been saying go rodeo. I think it's a total circus. And and there's a lot of players. So if we really want to answer it, which I think we have to, I mean, we're talking about impeachment. This is probably one of the most significant responsibilities I have in this job. And you're essentially being asked to nullify an election. So for me, if I'm going to vote to nullify an election, to start the process of removing someone, I want this answered succinctly. Did he do it? Did he do it to cause the foreign actor to help him win an election, the 2020 election? Is that what happened here? I think if you're going to answer that, it needs to be a bipartisan investigation. I remember the last fiasco, obviously not as a lawmaker. I was in high school, but I remember the drama around it. However, even with that one, Republicans and Democrats both got to investigate and present their sides. And right now, the leadership in the House is not allowing us to vote on whether or not to open that investigation. So, and now it's not going through the Judiciary Committee. Now it's going through the Intel Committee. The Intel Committee is a select committee. It's just picked by the leadership. And most of the time they meet in secret. It's not open to the public. They handle classified and sensitive information. So I very rarely know what's happening on the Intel Committee. Right now, that's the leader of this investigation. And he opened his inquiry last week by basically reading a parody of the call, which any fair-minded person would say, well, gee, is this person going to in an unbiased manner root out the information and be able to present it in a nonpartisan way before the Congress? And I would say unequivocally no. So for those folks, and I have constituents all over the map on this. I have people who were talking to me this last week who were just furious that I wasn't out there leading the charge to impeach. I have people who are saying there's no way you can. I've got the mix, which is why I keep coming to this is my bar. It needs to be clearly answered. But my message to those folks who are demanding impeachment now is communicate within your party structure that this needs to be a bipartisan deal. If you're going to remove the president from office, you don't want it to be something that people can disqualify as a partisan witch hunt. Like, if you really want to get to impeachment, don't let it go down this road.
A couple of things about
Yeah.
that. You mentioned
There's a lot here.
Last time, the Clinton impeachment, I assume is what you were referring to. Doesn't the bar for impeachment in that case, doesn't that now seem laughably low? If Clinton could face trial in the Senate for that compared to the accusations and some of the proven actions of President Trump.
I don't know if I'd say laughably low, but certainly a totally different context. I spoke with a senator who was in the Senate during that, and he voted, I think he had 2 counts And he said he voted for one, he voted against the other. And I said, oh, you voted, I assumed you voted for the one where it was perjury, because at least that was easily provable. And he said, no, I voted for the other one. Oh, okay. So I think it's a totally different context. I don't know how I would have responded in that circumstance. I think the bar was totally different. I can tell you what I see here and now today in the environment that we're in. I don't think we're going to turn this talk about a civil war just angers me because I think it's ridiculous. But I do think,
is that irresponsible on the part of the president?
yeah, I think it's irresponsible. How is that helpful for anybody? What I see, though, is an opportunity to answer questions that people want answered. But if we do it the wrong way, it's going to make it worse. It's going to make the partisan divide worse. It's going to make the feelings about it worse. It's going to harden people in their camps. And that's the opposite of where we need to go.
Is it your sense that the rest of the Republican Party setting now would put politics aside and agree to be a part of that?
Well, we've now offered 2 amendments on the floor to try and move to a formal inquiry, and both have been tabled.
Okay.
And I'm sure people do it for different reasons. I'm not going to speak to everybody's motives, but we've offered it now twice. And that was before some of this information has even trickled out, but that was in the last 2 weeks.
Well,
Both get tabled.
The Democrat talking point on that would be that voting for a formal inquiry would allow Republicans, would give them subpoena power.
Yes.
And they're worried that would turn it into a circus. And by the way, that rule was passed by Republicans the last time.
So I don't dispute what you're saying at all, and we can blame whoever we want to blame. But here's today. Is it in the best interest of the country if this is a partisan impeachment or if it's a bipartisan inquiry? Democrats can say that, and they may well be right. Who knows who gets subpoenaed? I'm not on those relevant committees. It's not going to be me calling them.
I'm not agreeing
right?
with them. I'm just saying that's the talk.
But to make the point is, even if that's right, even if I give them both of those points, it still doesn't make it the right thing to do to proceed with a partisan impeachment. Because this really isn't, let me explain this. It's not about Donald Trump. It's not about me. It's not about this, who's in charge of the House. This is about the entire institution and how our democracy functions. And unless someone's going to be the adult and do it the right way, we're going to make it worse. That's my opinion.
And let me go back just for a second. You mentioned the basic question, and it's easy on something like this. So often the basic question gets lost.
Oh yeah.
In all the,
yes.
the fluff around it. Anyway, but the basic question is, did he withhold military aid to Ukraine
in exchange to get him
right.
to help him with the election?
And my understanding is that was about $400 million in military aid. That was approved by Congress,
yes.
was it not?
Yes.
So first of all, how can he unilaterally withhold that?
So there are certain levers. It's not that he was, and this is why you saw Ron Johnson, who was directly on this committee of jurisdiction in August, start to hear about this and jump in, which is our oversight role. So as it was being kind of let out, those folks on the committee of jurisdiction started ringing the bell saying, wait a minute, this money's supposed to be let. Why isn't it being let? Now there are legitimate reasons, and I don't think it's unreasonable for anybody to say this country gets money from us, root out corruption, right? That's fine. And it's not even wrong to say that if it means your political rival is going to go up or down based on that. What's wrong is if you're doing that for your political benefit. And I guess...
And then,
yeah,
so the texts that were revealed, let's see, from the State Department, and Gordon Sondland, the ambassador to the European Union.
Yes.
And in one of them, Bill Taylor of the State Department says, as I said on the phone, I think it's crazy to withhold security assistance for help with a political campaign. And Sondland replied, call me.
Well, he actually said that you're not seeing it correctly or something like that. Call me. So
okay.
The rest of that quote is he actually disputed that and said this isn't for political gain.
So
is it true? Is it not true? I don't know.
So anyway, and then moving forward to say you mentioned it's not necessarily about which party's in charge or who the
Mhm.
president is, etc. But given that, and given the institution,
Mhm.
and frankly the fragility of the institution, do you think it is helpful? Do you think it is impeachable when the president and the White House ignore subpoenas and
Mhm.
says they will not cooperate and prevents Sondland, for instance, from testifying?
Who purportedly wants to
Supposedly he
testify,
does,
right?
yeah.
Look, I don't think the White House, I don't think it's helpful, and I don't think they'll be able to stonewall forever. I mean, that happened in the last, 24 hours? I think it's their
Yeah.
opening salvo. No. But I see the point. When one party is saying the other party doesn't get to be a part of the investigation, I mean, you kind of question, is this going to be a fair investigation? I see the point. So, again, my response generally is to my constituents who say, I want you to pursue impeachment, is you want me to do this, you don't want this to be a partisan impeachment. You need to call on your party leadership to say, open this up and let it be a fair fight. Republicans did this with Clinton. They gave Democrats subpoena power. And whether you agree on the final articles of impeachment or not, both parties got to subpoena people and put together a case. That has to happen here. Otherwise the president's going to have, in the minds of the American public, he's going to have the right to say that's a total witch hunt. If they really believe they can prove it, then why not let us subpoena people and bring in, and so then they can say it's a fair level playing field. We made the case, you made the case, and we can try it in the court of public opinion. Not the least of which, Congress, but under cameras and everything else. Right now, they're hurting. I think here's part of why they're not doing it, to just break it down. Part of the reason they keep tabling this motion is they don't want to take that formal vote to open it, because there's 31 Democrat members who are moderate members in seats that they took from Republicans, or I shouldn't say it that way, they're not the Republican seats, right? But they took seats and knocked off incumbents. And those members are in Trump won districts, and they don't want those members to have to take this vote. But if this is so egregious, and if this president needs to be removed from office because he did this thing, and we're going to nullify this election, this should not be about protecting whose seat, right?
And I want to go back for one. Would it really nullify an election? The election occurred, but then if somebody, so that argument is that once someone is elected, then he or she is a dictator, and there's no reason.
No, it is nullifying an election, and we have a way to do that legally in the Constitution. That's why we have that right and that power, so that no one is above the law and that people can be removed.
Do you think Trump has broken the law?
I think it needs to be proven that Trump has broken the law. I don't think it's fair to set a different standard for one person than anybody else, and we all deserve due process. We all deserve our day in court. And he does.
What were your thoughts?
And here's the piece. So I think it's important to say. So you are reversing an election, and this isn't an election. I think
Republicans would still have the White House.
You'd be removing the choice of the majority, right? You'd be removing who was
the majority of voters.
Okay, through our electoral system, and I support the Electoral College. We're from a small state. We all should support the Electoral College. Otherwise, it'd be Texas, New York, and California choosing our president, which would disenfranchise the rest of us. But anyway, he was the duly elected president of the United States, although Hillary Clinton's running around saying it wasn't a fair election. And I'm like, oh my goodness, this is the exact reverse of where we were in the summer of 2016 when she was reminding him that this election is going to stand legally and everything's upside down. But we would be removing him, and this isn't about Republicans, not about Donald Trump. I look at this count, I look at this district voted for Donald Trump. Will they again? I don't know. But if this is a partisan process, it seems to me that a better process would be in the next year and a half, give them the shot again to say yes or no. At least that's respecting the will of my voters. And I'd rather do that than giving a bunch of partisan politicians this incredible power that is going to further divide us, unless it's done appropriately. If it's done appropriately and we follow these facts out, I just think it gives no one any place to hide, Republicans or Democrats. I mean, they're giving a giant place for everybody to oppose it, but they're doing it intentionally. I mean, Al Green said it. It was in the last 9 months. We have to impeach because we can't win the election. Well, it's not an appropriate use of power. You know, there was a number of Democrats, and I don't even bring these points up, but for the sake of the roundness of this conversation, you know, there was a group of Democratic senators who asked Ukraine to investigate Trump. I didn't freak out about that because I felt like, you know, they're not talking about removing him from office. It's not, you know, it's not undoing the will of my voters. Do I like it? Do I think it's appropriate? No. Do I think that the president had an appropriate conversation? No. Do I think that was wise? No.
So then in the middle of
But that's not a high enough bar for impeachment. Sorry, go ahead.
The impeachment inquiry, then he urges China to investigate the Bidens.
Yeah,
What
not
are your
helpful.
thoughts on that?
It's totally inappropriate. But, you know, we all know how I voted for president. I don't know how anybody else here did. And I know how my district voted for president. And I am respectful. I also think that people knew pretty well, warts and all, who Donald Trump was when they voted for him. And I respect where their vote is.
So I'm curious about that. If your district had, say, voted for Clinton, then would you approach impeachment differently?
No, because impeachment, so it needs to be a fair process regardless, right? I mean, I would have approached it this way under the last president. I mean, you can remember under him, I disagreed quite significantly with a number of his policies. I never once, and your response probably would be, well, he didn't tweet and say things that this president does. But I never made it about his personality, about the fact that he was a Democrat, that, you know, my team lost and his team won. You know, I tried to keep it about, within the jurisdiction of my job, keep it about the policies, benefit or hurt the people I serve. And I've tried to take that same tack with this president. At times it's more challenging.
Do you think that's a fair comparison if you're talking about personalities?
Well, I'm talking about the office, how I approached
Right.
the office. That was my point in illustrating that.
Do you think that Trump's personality maybe requires we all take a little different approach?
Do I think he doesn't deserve the same due process that the rest of us?
No, I'm not saying that.
Well, but I'm not being asked to comment on whether or not I think he's got a good personality, whether his judgment in certain matters, you know, and his phone calls are diplomatic. I have my opinions, but that's not my job. My job is in this respect, with regard to impeachment, is did he commit high crimes, treason, misdemeanors? And for me, that's a clear bar. Prove it or don't prove it. Not do I think he handled
Do
the
you
call well.
think could that phone call be construed as bribery? Because
I think it can be construed both ways.
Specifically mentioned in the Constitution.
I think it can be construed. That's why we have to get more information. That's why we have to prove it or disprove it. Which is the same. I mean, it's the same if you're convicted or you go into the local court for something. You have that right? There's burdens of proof. And this isn't a courtroom. It's not exactly a parallel. But I have to choose something that I feel like is a clear, fair bar. Because either way we go, it's going to impact a lot of people. And I want to at least be able to tell them I did this in a just way. Good or bad. Like, I shouldn't say good or bad. Yes or no. So again, it's not about whether I like it. Boy, this to me, here's the other frustration I have. This is such a catastrophic derailment of what Congress should be doing, right? I mean, cost of prescription drugs, healthcare in general, transportation issues. We've heard from the beginning of this administration from both Democrats and Republicans, we're going to do a big transportation package, like a big one. We're really going to fund it. I don't think those things are
we'll
going to
get
get done.
that in a second. Just
Okay.
do you think that derailment is that more a result of the president's actions or the House leadership, the Democratic leadership?
I think there's blame enough to go around. I mean, I'm a mom of 3 small children. I could very easily say, this is your fault here, and this is your fault here, and this is your fault here. But is that going to teach my kids anything? Is that going to move us forward? No. We all got a part in this because we're a team, like it or not. And we are. We're all part of we are all part of the government the American people sent there to do their work, like it or not. So can we move forward in a way that a reasonable, rational person of either party can say, okay, that's fair. Okay, that's not fair. That's in this day and age, I guess that is a harder thing to do, but it is that's where I'm aiming.
Any other questions about impeachment or? Okay, let's talk transportation really quick.
Let's do it.
Where do we go on the I-5 bridge, and what is the federal government's role going to be?
Okay, I-5 bridge. The way I've been looking at this recently, and you know this, is there's the need to replace the bridge, make sure it's safe, it's not going to fall down, right, in a seismic event, right. I also believe we need to add congestion relief to that project because that's what most of us deal with when we cross the bridge. And I think the federal government's responsibility there is to provide funding. In the last, in that 18 budget, and certainly in this year's mark, we've worked to include a couple different pots of money that have $1.5 billion to $2 billion one is for big projects, regional, national, significant projects. One is more on the transit side, making sure that there's money there for things like bus rapid transit that allows to pull down those federal dollars. Having said that, the way that money is let is there is a local request. And that is moving forward. Those conversations are taking place both at the executive. I know that our mayor's done a lot of work to reach out and build relationship on the other side of the river, but also with our state lawmakers. And both states have begun to kind of reapproach.
So for there to be a request, would they have to have a specific plan? Would that be after the process?
I think they have to have a pretty good plan. I don't know if every single detail has to be worked out, but it has to generally be an agreed upon, not 100%, but a majority agreed upon proposal because they're making the grant application.
Okay.
And that is where I, from my part in the last go around and certainly moving forward, my biggest concern is is this going to meet our needs in Clark County, and do we generally agree? And that's where I feel like the local lawmakers have such a strong opportunity to build that consensus and work with their counterparts in Oregon. Now, having said that, one of the biggest question marks I see to any kind of bridge project getting off the ground is Oregon's plan to toll. Mm-hmm. Because if that money gets diverted, it ain't coming back to help us with a bridge, right? I had a conversation with the governor about this a couple weeks ago. He had some good points to me. He wasn't pleased with some of the way I presented some information, which is totally fair. But he said, my understanding is they're going to be opening up opportunities, in Delta Park, which anybody who's driven through the Rose Quarter knows that's where the congestion is. And I was like, awesome. Tell me right now that tolling money is going to do that. I will go back to my voters, and I guarantee you they are not going to say boo about that. But I haven't gotten that. They won't put that out publicly. And he pledged to further, investigate. So I appreciate that on his behalf. But I haven't seen it. In fact, what I've seen is, so there's two different ways they're going to do it. The Abernathy Bridge project, they're using one type of tolling authority, and I think that's fair.
At the end of 205.
And it's a user fee, and the requirement under the authority is the money gets used on what so the driver who drives over it, that money has to be used right there. Okay. I can't complain about that. That's Oregon. That's pretty far south, and it's going to people who drive it and pay it are going to see the benefit. Sure. They're not doing that with this one. With this one, it's a wide open authority. And they're going to be within at least 5 miles of the bridge, and they can use that money for anywhere in the state. Mm-hmm. And that's a cash cow for Oregon State infrastructure projects without any commitment to our bridge or a corridor.
The majority of that would be Washington.
They minimize it, but we know out of this county, it's 2/3 of the county commute, at least commute to Oregon, and I would wager a fair number of those are on this bridge. So they won't commit to it, and I think there's a reason they won't commit to it. So my message continues to be, there's two pieces. Oregon needs we need that coalition. I need the political help from our state's leaders, who have some of those relationships, whether it's governor to governor, senator to senator. I need that help to broker some deal there. In addition, like I said, if they were going to commit to that it being as a direct user fee and they were going to do something about congestion, I don't think they would meet resistance in Clark County. But I think they're meeting resistance because they're not willing to do that. And I forgot where my last piece was going to go on that. I just think that we do, that is an elephant in the room with regard to the Columbia River project. And I've talked with our mayor about it as well. And she's done good work in building relationships and keeping those conversations. She keeps saying it. The area where Kate Brown, I think in the last year, said it's going to be light rail into Clark County. Like, she said it unequivocally. And I full tilt push back on that. Like, nothing gets to be unilateral. In fact, I think it's reasonable and rational to say we have to have a mass transit component. We want to pull down some of those dollars. My message has been, let's compromise. Let's do a bus rapid transit link into your light rail system. That allows us to grow. I had a conversation with the Department of Transportation official about some grant funding opportunities for some of our communities here. But I just happened to mention our bus rapid transit line at Mill Plain and or our Vine Maple Place, and she said it's really wise of you to support BRT. And I said, I didn't know her. I said, tell me why. And she said, because by the time you get through the EIS and you've actually built a rail system, you've got maybe 5 years of technological capacity before that car that you're using and the system you're operating is obsolete. She said, we're just moving at such a rapid rate. She said, with buses, the lifespan, these BRT buses, is about 12 years. But you use it up, and then you're available and free to work on new technologies. Whereas with the other one, because you've let the loans and you've done the bonds, you're on the hook to repay the federal government for 30 years. I thought yet another reason for them to compromise on this piece and allow us to hook in with something that allows us to grow and evolve and change. I just think it's dollars and cents wise for us. I've always said it's not my responsibility or my right to say this is what the bridge needs to look like, that needs to be local. But I'm getting to the point where I'm starting to suggest things. One of the things they do in DC when they move people out of Northern Virginia into downtown DC and back, it's like 1 million people a day that they move in and out of the city. Reversible lanes.
Right.
They're not expensive. They're pretty easy to move forward, and
one
they
in
allow you
Seattle
to move.
as well, for part of it.
Do they?
They have an express lane.
Oh, an express
that
lane.
goes different
Yeah,
directions.
yes. So you
on
can
private way.
you can switch that. I mean, that's a major traffic flow issue, and that's how we move here. That's what our system looks like.
And
The
play
cost
devil's
is,
advocate.
yeah.
In DC, they move a lot of people by their rail.
And do you know that their light rail system, with the 1 million people plus that they move in and out of that city every day, does not pencil out? It is in the red in DC.
Mass transit always is. It's always
Not
subsidized.
so. It is no. That's why. So the most efficient and effective type of transit that actually works and pays for itself is van pooling. So there are types that are more applicable that make dollars and cents that allow us to be flexible. We just can't be wed to one technology. Sure. I think that's like saying we want remember the brick cell phones? Like, this is it. This is what we're going to use. I don't think anybody saw the iPhone coming, and I think we need to be a little bit more flexible in that. But to your point, my job, my role, making sure federal dollars in place and trying to help this system along. I'm not the dictator, certainly, but, when I brought that up to the governor, he said, well, what's your idea? I said, well, since you're asking, I would love to I definitely want to see a bus rapid transit link on our side, and I would love to see a reversible lane. My goodness, that's so much cheaper and so much more effective. And he was like, oh, well, I'll look into it. Great.
Anything else? Okay.
I'll let you guys.
Great. Anything else? Well, Jamie, thank you for your time.
Thank you. I
Appreciate
appreciate
it.
it.